I'm Dan Pomerantz. I'm the current governor for the Hudson Valley region and soon to be past president of the New York chapter of ACP. My term ends in a couple of weeks, a week and a half, actually. Um, Isaiah, why don't you advance the slides? We're going to have a conversation with Richard Rubin and Lou Snitkoff tonight about retirement. This is sponsored by the Hudson Valley Central District of New York ACP. We are the largest medical specialty organization, and we have over 12,000 members in New York. And there's some other upcoming events, including one following this at 7 p.m. tonight. So if you have more time, please join the 7 o'clock event. Eric Last is going to be presenting a couple of songs and interpreting them and inviting people to share their interpretations. We have a number of other events coming up. Our series, Wisdom and Wellbeing, on making things work better, and others. We have some things here for if you're involved in teaching programs, poster competitions, and the doctor's dilemma. There are QR codes there. If you have your phone out and you want to take a shot. And October 26th in Tarrytown will be the New York State statewide scientific meeting. And the program committee is already at work on that. And it looks like it should be a lot of fun. Uh, so we had decided before this event that we put the speakers' bios in the program announcement, so we weren't going to rehash full introductions now because we thought a lot of the information was going to come out from the discussion. The idea for this discussion actually came from Richard Rubin. With everybody's permission, I'm going to use first names tonight. I want this to be an informal presentation. If you prefer to be called by something else, please just say so. What this came from was the suggestion that we didn't really talk much about we were talking about other transitions, but we weren't really talking about the transition out of full-time work and what that meant and how that felt. And we knew people who had the experience of making that transition and then not really knowing what was happening and feeling kind of lost. And we thought we'd take an opportunity to talk about that. This was inspired, as I said, by Richard's request that we do something like this. I want to give some credit for some of the discussion questions to my colleague, Colleen Christmas, who is the governor from Maryland, who ran a similar program for her chapter. One of the basic rules of all of these programs is if somebody has something good, see if you can reuse it. And I'm reusing it with grateful credit to Dr. Christmas. Okay, so with that, what we're going to do is I have a bunch of questions. We're going to start, and then Richard and Lou are going to alternate who speaks first so that, and if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If you have a burning question, unmute and ask. This is a fairly small group, so I think we can make this more informal. If somehow over time the group gets rather large, great, we'll do that. And we'll manage things a little differently. So by a coin flip, Lou will be going first. So just to warm up, share one or two areas of your professional expertise and one or two personal joys or passions that make you happy.
Thanks, Dan. And one thing that makes me happy is to be part of this program with my fellow Capital Region veteran, Richard Rubin, and our colleagues who are joining us from various places in New York. So my two areas of professional expertise, I would say, are ambulatory quality of ambulatory care with an emphasis on population health, and more recently, physician well-being. My personal passions are family and photography.
Hi, Richard.
Like Lou, I had kind of a split career, partially practice and partially administration. Um, in primary care, I really liked everything and was interested in everything. I think cardiac risk factor reduction was one of the things that I felt I specialized in. I liked taking care of headaches, and I liked taking care of fibromyalgia, and I know how unusual that is. In the administrative area, I had more of a micro view on patient safety and quality than Lou did. It was more on the individual patient and individual physician aspect. Improving the patient experience was something I spent a lot of time on, particularly trying to do that within the confines of an ever too brief office visit. Um, I love all genres of music. I shouldn't say that. Hip hop does not do it for me, but I'm trying. Um, I love reading, especially biographies, and my endless pursuit is trying to understand relativity, and I don't expect to be able to do that before I die.
Hi. All right. Um, so, so Richard, the next question, when we shift into the later parts of our career, people change what they do, sometimes wholly retiring, partly retiring. Can you talk about what weighed into the decision for you and how that process happened and where it took you?
Yeah, I retirement. I didn't decide to retire. Retirement decided that it was going to take me. Um, and I know that sounds strange. I was working as a full-time hospital chief medical officer, and there was a large hospital merger here in Albany, and there was a game of musical chairs for physician executives, and I was the one that was left standing up. Um, I spent a brief period of time in ambulatory administration, and after that, I did a whole number of things. It was like I was investigating careers again. I consulted for a while on patient experience, spending time in various parts of the country. I became certified in hyperbaric medicine. I ran a hyperbaric unit for a period of time. I did clinical gerontology, but found that the pandemic and trying to do gerontology via televisit was not sustainable for me. So I did various things. At one point, I had three different part-time jobs, all of which ended for one reason or another, and that's when I consider retirement happened. So it really was not proactive, but I can tell you that I felt ready for it. Um, I knew that the life of a full time primary care physician was not something that I could do any longer. I would have loved to find part time work, but given our specialty and the need for continuity, it was not easy for me to find time to be a part time primary care doc unless I wanted to do urgent care or something like that. And the continuity is one of the things I love about what we do for a living. So I was fully retired at one point, and then I have gone back into what I'm doing now, which is spending a day and a half a week working for the state health department. So I'm not fully retired, but I'm 60% retired. So as I said, it kind of came upon me rather than me making a distinct plan that, I'm going to send in a letter and this is going to be my last day. And I think there's quite a few people with a story similar to that.
Lou?
So, somewhat similar to Richard, my career as an internist was bifurcated about halfway through. So I spent 22 years doing primary care internal medicine in Schenectady, here in the Capital District. And then for the last 2 of those years, I began sort of a part-time role as medical director of our physician group practice. And, one of the things that Richard said about part-time primary care resonates with me, because during that time, I was administrative 3 days a week in our central office, and I was clinical 2 days a week. And it was very difficult from the standpoint of continuity to manage patient care 2 days a week. Fortunately, I had very good coverage from my colleagues, but on the administrative side, I didn't really have coverage, and administrative issues arose every day, whether I was, quote, an administrator or a clinician, on that particular day. And it got to the point where I always felt that no matter where I was supposed to be somewhere else. So that experiment, it lasted a couple of years, but it was probably a couple of the toughest years of my career. So about 3/4 of the way into that, I approached the board of managers of our group and said, if you're ready for a full-time medical director or, a full-time CMO, I'm happy to do it. But if you're not, I'm just going to go back and see patients full-time. And they said, no, we're a large group and we need some central clinical leadership. So, go for it. So I had about 6 months to wind down my clinical practice. And there were some relationships that were very difficult to leave, patient relationships. Some patients I knew I would miss a lot, and others probably not so much, as we can all identify with. And so after that 6 months, I moved into administration full-time, and did that in a variety of sort of iterations for the next 20 years or so. I had an interest in medical management early on, and had some experience doing some very part-time medical management work for a local not-for-profit regional HMO. And that's what kind of sparked my interest in medical administration, and eventually stepping back and looking at clinical issues from a larger perspective, in the sense that, that in that role, I had responsibility for a whole lot of patients as opposed to just the one sitting across from me in the examining room.
Okay. All right. So you sort of started talking about the changes you went through and the choices you made as you made the transition from clinician to clinician administrator to administrator, and now, just sort of talking about that as you then decided to make the transition from full-time CMO to what came next. What were the things you considered and went through as you thought about that?
So the group that I was involved with, and for the majority of my career, was a physician-owned, multi-specialty medical group, predominantly primary care. So being an owner of the group, there was a certain degree of job security that you had. And although it wasn't quite the same as owning a private practice or a small practice, because it was fairly large, there was certainly a sense of ownership, and a sense of I knew that I could come to work every day and have a place to work, and patients to see, and so forth. When I made the transition to administration, I continued to have an ownership interest in the group, but I served in that role at the pleasure of the board of managers, who, were colleagues of mine. They were people I knew and worked with, and interestingly, many of whom I had trained, because I was I was internal medicine coordinator for a family practice residency at a community hospital here in the Albany area. And a lot of those residents, after they graduated, joined the practice. So these were, people I had kind of a long history with. Um, about 3 years or so before I retired, uh, our group merged with another physician-owned, a very large physician-owned medical group in our area, a larger group than ours, that we thought was similar culturally. Later found out, it's not so much. And the role that I had in our group before the affiliation was that became kind of a duplicative role in the larger group because there was somebody in this other practice who was basically doing what I was doing. And so I was, I did, they didn't ask me to leave, but they didn't give me a whole lot to do either. So it was kind of an odd situation. So the group struck up an affiliation with one of the community hospitals in the area. And it turns out that hospital was looking for leadership for its physician practice. So although I remained an employee of the physician group, I was kind of deployed to be the vice president for the physician practice at this hospital, which interestingly was the place where I first started seeing patients, at the beginning of my practice in 1980. So it was kind of full circle. It was interesting being on the hospital side after being so many years in an ambulatory environment. And, although at the beginning I, made rounds as we all did back in the 1980s, I hadn't really been in a hospital environment in a long time. And as as was occurring with hospitals in the 20 teens and they were all financially strapped, and the marching orders were cut, 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 and and always looking for ways to save money in places to reduce and reduce. And at that point in my career, I decided I didn't really want to be the angel of death. I wanted to leave the community with in a more positive, a more positive viewpoint. So in mid to late 2019, I said, I've had about enough. Let's wind this down over 6 months or so. And it turns out that 6 months was the beginning of COVID. And so my last day of work was something like April 2nd of 2020. And I felt kind of peculiar, leaving at that moment, knowing what was coming. And at the same time, I was relieved to be leaving at that moment, knowing what was coming. And they didn't ask me to stay, and I didn't offer.
Okay. So Richard, you sort of started to talk about this. You mentioned sort of trying different things, but I was wondering if you wanted to say a little bit more about
Yeah, I think
your
Lou said
process.
something key, and that was, kind of the decision that it's time. I'll wind this down, the decision that it's time. I remember many years ago, I read something very depressing about retirement, and I read an anecdote about an older physician that walked into the ICU one morning, and a nurse came up to him and said, I just got a blood gas on your patient. Would you like to see it? And he realized that he had no idea what he was looking at, that, this was new technology to him. And he at that point said, I don't think I can do this anymore. And that really had an impact on me because I said, if I don't want to get to the point where I don't know what I'm doing, especially given the gravity of what we do. I said I want it to be I want to be competent until I decide to retire or not do this anymore, and I didn't want to be that doc. And we've all known a bunch of guys and women who were that doc, who kind of practiced a little bit longer than they should. Um, I, when I, leaving clinical practice and going to administration was much more difficult emotionally than retiring. I had a 3-month notice requirement, so I had 90 days of something like the Bataan Death March, where I had taken care of these people for 20 years, and they came in, like Lou said, some of them were like family, others were like dysfunctional family, but and it was so hard to say goodbye to people, and that again is the beauty of what we do for a living. Um, I also, I think that there will come a time when you'll say, I think it's time. Um, whether it's family obligations, whether it's health issues, whether it's a desire to do something else, a burning desire to do something else, whether it's that you have, accomplished some of the goals that you set out for in life, like educating your kids or anything else like that. Um, I don't think there will be a don't be the one walking into the ICU and looking bewilderedly at that blood gas. Um, that's the advice that I would have. Unfortunately, I don't feel like I was ever that doc. Um, I don't even remember what the question was, Dan, but
Okay,
that, that's my answer.
okay. It's a moving and useful answer, so we'll take it. Yeah, I think though, any doctor who likes taking care of patients with headaches and chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia,
Yeah,
yeah, those are the docs I think have a hard time overstaying their welcome.
yeah.
So
Well,
I'm
thank you.
sure there are many patients who still miss you.
Yeah.
Um, the the you the next question sort of like you mentioned feeling like retirement found you, but you also had a number of things that you you tried to do after that. So um, so there were some alternatives that you were kind of exploring, and just sort of to talk about what that exploration was like and what caught your attention, what held you, what ended up making it seem like it was time to stop.
Um, I think that the last part of your question, not so much time to stop, but time to do something different,
Hmm.
to scale it back, to do something different, or
Hmm.
to do the same thing, with less time
Hmm.
commitment or whatever. I will say, similar to every other stage in one's career, it's all about networking. It's all about going through your contact list. It's all about, as much as I dislike LinkedIn, it's all about seeing who you know. Um, I just a couple of tips for me was that I've never been involved in academic medicine. So I had over the years just asked one of my friends who was on the faculty about teaching. And it turned out that I had an opportunity to be volunteer faculty at Albany Med and teach your medical students just precept on physical diagnosis. A wonderful thing. It paid zero, but it was a wonderful thing. We all, as well, I don't know if this is something in this area that's peculiar, but there seem to be physicians who have like 20 or 30 side jobs. They're the physician for this organization or that organization. I was in touch with those folks and said, what do you know of where I can have something on a part-time basis? Um, I I can't overstate the value of networking. Um, and don't rule anything out. You don't know what you're going to enjoy and get fulfillment from until you try it. But the advice at this stage of one's career in finding something is not very different from any other stage in the career.
Lou, you want to talk about what you were thinking about and exploring as you went into that 6 month notice, or even thinking about giving that 6 month notice?
Well, I, I think a good deal of my exploring occurred prior to that, actually.
Hmm.
As a result of some of the changes I alluded to, the reorganizations and affiliations and things.
Mhm.
One of the things that historically has made our area here in the Capital District unique is that the health insurance market was dominated by two large regional not-for-profit payers that were based here in the Capital District. And in my role as an administrator for the medical group, I had opportunity to work directly with the physician leadership in those organizations. So at various times, they had openings that came about in their medical sort of in their hierarchy, their physician hierarchy, their leadership. And I considered some of those options from time to time, though when all was said and done, I preferred to continue to be on the delivery side rather than the insurance side. And although I did serve in various capacities on committees and boards and things of that sort, and in those organizations, as well as the Health Information Exchange in our area, which is called HIXNY. And it was one of the health information exchanges that achieved very early adoption and success in the HIE area. And so that was an opportunity that I found interesting and rewarding because it dovetailed nicely with the work that I was doing as an administrator in the medical group. Other opportunities that I pursued were predominantly volunteer opportunities, and I found those to be enjoyable and rewarding professionally and personally. I volunteered for more than 20 years with the American Cancer Society locally and at the state level, and then became involved with New York ACP. And one thing led to another there. As Dan can attest, and Nandini and Kelly and others on the Megan and others on this call. And so, the opportunity to get involved in those, sort of ancillary activities helped, I think, dissuade me from wandering too far from what I was doing with my day job at those times.
So now we're getting to it's a seemingly trivial, but I think sort of serious question. How do you introduce yourself at social events? Who are you when you meet someone who doesn't know you?
I think I'm up for that, right? For the
Yeah.
first crack at that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I, you know, I was never one to stand on ceremony as a physician.
Mm-hmm.
For, as long as I can remember in my career, I introduced myself as Lou. And, I think my mother was much more impressed with the fact that I was a physician than I was. So for me, that hasn't really changed so much. All of us, I'm sure, are multidimensional individuals and have multiple roles in our lives, multiple identities. And that's kind of a shifting thing. And at certain times in our lives, certain identities are more prevalent or more important than others. For a good chunk of my life, I was a son. For less of a chunk, I was a grandson. I'm a father, I'm a brother-in-law, I'm a grandfather now. I am a photographer. I'm a well-being champion, ACP well-being champion. So I don't see myself as having lost uh, my identity or feel as though I'm at sea with respect to that. Though clearly I don't necessarily identify, I certainly don't identify myself as a clinician anymore. I think once, as an active clinician, I think once a physician, always a physician in some sense. And I guess I'd have to say that that aspect of my identity um, is certainly less in the forefront than it was. People still ask me questions that sometimes I can answer and sometimes I can't with respect to issues they're having. But I've always been comfortable introducing myself as Lou, and I still am.
Richard?
This to me is a really central question, and this topic of professional identity and who you are is what attracted me in the beginning to multiple small feedings. And I love when we get into these kind of discussions because I think there you talk to one doc and you've gotten one doc's opinion on this. Um, I find that being a physician is part of my DNA. And it is very important to me. I consider it a responsibility, a blessing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was when I went from a practicing clinician to a full time administrative role, it was much harder for me to explain to people, both physicians and non physicians, what I did for a living. Um, I'm a doctor, but I work in an office. I don't see patients. And the whole thing about being a CMO and which side you're on, all of those kind of things. Um, I introduce myself quite simply now. People will ask me what I do. If I go to a medical appointment, for example, sometimes there is a doctor on my chart, sometimes there isn't, and I will just say I'm a semi-retired primary care doctor who works part-time for the state health department. That people understand retirement. People don't necessarily understand administration, where physicians are concerned. But this I think it's vitally important. And if there was one number one golden rule for retirement, I think, at least this is for me, is to do things that allow you to nurture and to still feel that identity as a physician. It's very important to me. And just like Lou, I don't stand on formality with anyone. But it does my heart good to know the work I've done and the work I expect to continue doing. And when I get calls, as I did today, from people who say, "Can you find me a new primary care doc?" because they're all retiring. I love that people still see me and I'm still able to help. So,
Um, so our next question starts with you, Richard, what has surprised or delighted you the most? And then conversely, what's disappointed you the most in this phase of your life?
um, I I love having more time. It doesn't seem like life has gotten any less busy, but I don't really know how I would find the time to do full time work at this point in my life. Between working a day and a half a week and the varied things that I do. I mean, I grocery shop for a local senior citizens organization. I grocery shop for senior citizens. I do lots of things like that. I was on the local library board. Just having the time to do things and to branch out and do things that I use the word nourish a lot, nourish me personally,
Mhm.
I think is the most really delightful thing. Um, the work I'm doing now is, again, you have to, if you find something part time or you find a transitional career, you need to see if it's something that does it for you. I, for a period of time, worked for a managed care organization doing pre-authorizations. That was not work that nourished me.
Mm.
Comparing this patient to a list of criteria and saying yes or no, that didn't do it for me. But the work I do now is more medical legal and involves judgment and clinical knowledge. And I find I really, am I delighted by the work? I guess it's close, but I really enjoy what I'm doing now. I I delight in my wife just retired. I delight in that relationship. I delight having a grown child. Lots of things, lots of. So I think as we go through life, as Lou kind of talked about it, it's like Gail Sheehy's Passages. I think I'm showing my age, but the book about different things that happen to us as we go through different stages. But I think this is a very good time of life, for me.
Well,
Yes. So, like Richard, I enjoy having more free time. I enjoy the freedom. I enjoy the spontaneity of being able to do something when I want to do it, or do something with family when we, as a group, want to do it, and not worry about, other obligations. And at the same time, the absence of routine is difficult, especially if I if I stop to think about it. What am I missing? And I definitely miss the camaraderie of interacting on a daily basis with colleagues and physicians that I worked with for so many years, and in my administrative role with other folks in administration, physicians and lay people that I worked with for many years, who were very talented individuals and people I saw and interacted with every day. So that's been difficult, and it's been difficult to stay in touch with them, despite good intentions and effort on my part and theirs, I think. When I first retired, as I alluded to earlier, it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was during lockdown, and that was not at all how I envisioned retirement. Spending day after day at home playing Scrabble, and just it was, that was kind of mind-numbing, and it was very difficult after having such a very active lifestyle as a clinician and later as an administrator. And gradually that's eased, but there's still that issue, sort of. I mean, we all know that COVID isn't gone, and understanding that that's still in the background is a difficult thing, and it's been disappointing that it's been going on for so long, and looks like it will be going on for a while longer. What has been most delightful has been the opportunity to spend more time with my photography, which has been a passion and something that I've loved doing since my college days. So we're, going on, beyond 50 years. I had my 50th reunion last year. And I particularly enjoy photographing outdoors, not so much in the middle of winter and early spring here in upstate New York, but other seasons, and being on the shore and being around the water, and that really has been great. And we are blessed with two granddaughters, one who's 3.5 and the other who's about 16 months. And it's been absolutely delightful to have an opportunity to spend time with our our kids and their kids.
So this is the last of the formal questions. It'll go to you first, Lou. Uh, any tips or advice, things that you thought really were helpful to have done, things you wish you had done differently?
Well, I think one thing I would say is that it's never too early to start planning for retirement, which I think is somehow qualitatively different than thinking about retirement, right? When you think about retirement, it seems like a more proximate, sort of a thing, but planning for retirement is sort of long range planning. And I was fortunate to receive good financial advice, and I know Richard has some thoughts about this too. And there's a separate session that I think is in the works about finances associated with retirement. But I was fortunate to have, from when I first went into practice and we had self-employed retirement plans and a small, our two-person practice. Our accountants kept encouraging us to put money away for retirement, and at that stage when you're in your 20s, it was hard to understand the rationale for that, but it's certainly something that I appreciate now, having done it. Um, I I don't really have regrets. I can't think of a lot of things that I would have done differently. I do think it's important to have a plan. I believe it's important to have things you're passionate about so that when the time comes that you step away from your day-to-day career, that you have things that you can engage in that are fulfilling for you personally and professionally. For me, the ACP has certainly been a huge part of that. And, I would encourage people to, become involved in those kinds of activities and immerse yourselves as much as you can, as much as your time permits. And then there is certainly a lot to be gained from volunteer activities, such as Richard alluded to. And there are all sorts of volunteer opportunities, both within the clinical realm and not. And they range from medical missions overseas to working with children in disadvantaged communities, and the whole gamut, senior citizens and so forth. So there are I came across, it's interesting. I didn't do an exhaustive literature search, but it's hard to find much in the literature about retirement as it relates to physicians. I did, I searched the New England Journal and the Annals and JAMA and so forth, and I came across a handful of things, and I'll post some links in the chat for people who are interested. Interestingly, one of them was a on being a doctor piece that was written by Robert Moser in 2008. And Robert Moser was a past executive vice president of ACP. And he passed away about 11 years ago. But he was, one of the leaders of the college. The other was written more recently by, I think, a community-based physician in the Boston area in the New England Journal of Medicine. And they were both, interesting pieces in different ways. One was, more philosophical, and the other was a little more practical. I came across something called the Retirement Manifesto, which is a website and also has a blog. And one of the pieces was called The Four Phases of Retirement, which somehow reminded me of the five phases of grief. Yeah, it's kind of funny how the mind works when you connect these things. But they described the four phases, which the first was the vacation or honeymoon phase, which, is a variable duration. The second is the phase that they describe as being lost and loss, where you sort of you regret, what you've lost in terms of connections and things that I alluded to, and you maybe feel somewhat lost in terms of where to turn, what to do. And then there is a trial and error phase where maybe dip your toe in different waters and see what may appeal to you and what may be fulfilling. And then the final phase, they say, is reinvent and rewire. And it's just kind of interesting to read about framing things in that way. There's also someone described the concept of new retirement, and new retirement is no retirement. And as it relates to baby boomers who sometimes are, reluctant to let go, and a subset have unretired, as Richard has to some extent, where you find something with a little bit of structure and but still giving you some flexibility. So I do think that if you think creatively about options and opportunities and are introspective enough to have a handle on what floats your boat, so to speak, and what's meaningful to you, it can generally be a positive experience. There's nothing in life that's not without its drawbacks, but all things considered, I think I'm a pretty happy person right now.
Okay. All right. So, Richard, the same to you. And as Richard's answering, please feel free to turn on your cameras. We're going to have a few minutes for more open discussion or questions. So, here you go, Richard.
Yeah, when we first envisioned this program, there was a lot of emphasis on the financial aspects of retirement. And when I thought about it, that was not where I wanted to go, but it's tremendously important. So we are going to do a separate program about that. But the things, the points about the financial aspects of retirement that I would tell you, based on my own experience, is number one, don't compare your financial status with anyone else. It's kind of when you left your biochemistry test, and you heard people discussing their answers, and you thought you failed. So everybody is different. I spoke with a colleague who gave me a number of what he felt they needed to have before they retired, and I slunk away like I was a failure in life. But I think for each person it's an individualized decision. The second thing is, and Lou mentioned this, is to affiliate yourself with a financial person who, number one, you trust, and number two, has experience with retirement, and work on that. And the third is put away what you can within the limits of what you need to live. So you'll never put away enough, but do the best you can. I think the other piece of advice I would have is to keep reading and keep learning. Um, I realize that there are some there are areas in medicine now that didn't exist when I was in medical school and training. I look at the TV commercials now for the drugs that end in IB and AB, and I realize that this is a huge deficit in my medical knowledge at this point, is having not been raised on those drugs. The tremendous advances in diabetes, which I have kept up with to some extent, but keep reading, keep growing, not only in medicine but in other areas as well. In terms of doing things differently, I don't know that there's anything I would have done differently. I find that the career that meanders still has, there are people that go straight ahead into one practice, will stay there, and then clean out their office in 35 years, and that's great. My career and Lou's, and many others have meandered and taken different turns. And I have benefited and learned something from each of them. There are some parts that I would not repeat and some that I would. But you know, I really don't have don't have regrets at this point from what I've done. And my only regret at this point is that I don't have time to do more of the things that I like to do and nourish me. Um, my last piece of advice is find what nourishes you, because it's going to be very different for each of us.
I want to take a moment here to thank both of you for sharing with us so openly and so honestly. I really appreciate that. Um, I want to echo that advice about financial planning. It pains me to say this. My father was right. It early on told me to start setting aside money before I had anything else. Open an IRA, yeah, he was right. And years later, when my wife and I did finally actually sit down with a financial planner and realize, okay, we could make this work. That was it was really very helpful. I'm not going to go into that. This is not to tell my story. I just want to thank both of you, and thank Isaiah from ACP for helping us get this going.